Another edition of Everyone Hates Cleveland, the podcast. We are back after a short hiatus. Joining me, my new co-host, which is the same as the old co-host. He is the man with a season ticket package for the first time in his life. Yes, Mike Hattery. Michael, how are you doing?
I'm fantastic.
I don't know if this is the opportunity. I don't know if we talked about, I don't know, anyone's favorite. We haven't talked about everyone's favorite Irish ale in a while. Are we done with that, or are we still riding that? It is the week. We're now less than 7 days away from St. Paddy's Day. Are we still going to ride that train? I'm still kind of on it.
I just cannot begin to fathom how foolish it is that Turntable is a year-round beer and Conway's is not. And these people are much smarter than I am with branding and marketing, and I understand that. But one of them is a good beer and one of them is not a good beer. So maybe we could make the good beer a year-round beer. So those are my thoughts.
My favorite beer is Nosferatu, and that's a seasonal as well. So maybe we should just make this a year-round thing until they listen to us and our millions and millions of listeners all across the globe, who I'm sure drink the same two beers we drink as well.
Yeah, if listeners could tweet at GLBC and ask them to make Conway's a year-round beer, that would make my day. I'm trying to make their social media person as irritated as possible about the fact that they won't make it a year-round beer. So,
well, I'm just going to throw this out there too. I talked to a local grocery store chain here in the fantastic city of Erie, who carries said Conway's and Nosferatu, and guess what they always sell out of really quickly? I'll just leave it there.
So this is a thing too. Can I rant some more?
You can.
This is really about it. So we're a week until they stop marketing it, right? We're a week till it. Once St. Paddy's Day passes, it's over. Mike's happy time is over. And that's fine. Okay, but 2 grocery stores and a CVS, which I rely on to provide me with this delightful beverage, are sold out of it. They've run out. They don't have any more Conways left. They're in between shipments. They can't get enough Conways. And so, if you're going to make it a short run and it's your best beer, maybe have it available. That's all I'm saying.
You're done. This could be it. You could be done. I'm going to do you a favor, Mike. I'm going to get you whatever they have left today, right when we're done with this podcast. The problem with that is I may drink it all by the time I get to you. I'll save you one.
I think that's likely. I think that's more than likely.
All right, we're going to go ahead and actually talk about baseball. We may squeeze a little Conway's in here in a little bit, but we do have to finish up our positional previews. This is our goal. We need to get this done because we have many, many, many opinions about the Cleveland Indians in spring training, especially regarding the positions that have not yet been fixed yet, but that's for another day. Today we're going to talk about one of our favorite things to talk about, and that's the Cleveland Indians starting rotation. And Mike, I'm going to preface this with, while it's probably going to be mostly positive, I do have my Cleveland angst to kind of get in. We get this Cody Anderson news, and of course, with the way the season ended last year with, basically the MacGyver rotation of Corey Kluber and Josh Tomlin and Bloody Fingers and whoever, and Ryan Merritt and all these other guys that are just getting thrown into the equation, including the bullpen starting stuff. There is always, when you hear this Cody Anderson news, while Cody Anderson certainly isn't a main cog in this rotation, when you get a pitcher getting shut down, especially when you're talking about a UCL, anything that ends in a CL, especially when you've had elbow surgery in the offseason, these are the things that concern me, because while this rotation on paper always looks great when you look at Kluber, Carlos Carrasco, Danny Salazar, Trevor Bauer, and Josh Tomlin, all of said pitchers except for one have had some sort of issues in the past 3 years regarding injury. And while some of them have been minor, all of them have missed at least a month of time. And then, of course, when you have, the Trevor Bauer finger incident, and the only reason why I throw that in there is because Bauer does have a tendency to, go rogue with things. While the one book end of this rotation is, yes, as Danny Salazar tweeted earlier this spring, it could be the best in baseball. But as we saw, as they made the run to the World Series, it also there's on when you take the paper away, especially in March, there is another side to the coin. And I am going to bring that up. I guess I brought it up first, so I guess we're probably down that road. But first thoughts on the rotation. I mean, obviously, if everything stands true, and this rotation stays healthy, and they do have some avenues, which I'm sure we'll talk about, to keep the said rotation healthy, Mike. If everything stands true, this rotation looks great, but there are pros and cons to everything, correct?
Of course, there are always pros and cons, but yeah, I think, Jeff, Nam, and I had argued about this, and you and I have argued about this too, and I keep posing this question to people, and that is, what is the Indians' best unit as it relates to compares to the rest of the league? And 2 years ago, when we talked about this team, we were like, oh, the rotation has to stay healthy. We're riding the rotation. I think now that's really not the case. I think the rotation between, lineup, bullpen, and rotation, to me, the rotation is probably the third best unit. And that doesn't mean it's not an above average unit, because it is. It's a really good unit, but there's just the error bars have sort of moved in the wrong direction with this rotation in a couple ways. And Kluber's been fantastic, awesome. He pitched the most innings of his career last year by 30, which is a little concerning. He's moving into his early 30s. He's amazing. Carrasco, we would love to finally see that healthy season where he's out there for 190 innings and he clicks, but he hasn't done it yet, really. And then we have, Salazar, who is sort of like a walking, ticking time bomb with his right arm, and Trevor Bauer, who is a walking, ticking time bomb with his personality. So, and this is painting it in the worst light, but I think it's really important to talk about how much risk this rotation has and how much just an injury to your seventh best starter actually could be a pretty big deal when the eighth best starter is Ryan Merritt. And he was really great in one postseason start, but I'm not particularly optimistic about Ryan Merritt.
Well, and I think, we had the same conversation last year. We have depth, I think more depth than a lot of teams, but when you are into that depth, as we found out last year, and again, we're talking about a team that made it to the World Series with much of the rotation on the shelf, depending on a guy in Josh Tomlin who nobody really wanted to depend on, but he came through. I mean, but the counter to that is, of course, playoff baseball is vastly different. The way you can utilize a bullpen in short bursts of time. Now, the counter to that, of course, is we got this 10-day DL, and I want to get to the 10-day DL. I want to save that for the back end of this, but let's look at the big three here. Let's start with the big three, and let's tilt this to the positive direction. I mean, obviously, Mike, just in skill level alone, when you look at the top two at the very least, Corey Kluber and Carlos Carrasco, health, Carlos Carrasco's health has been in question the past couple of seasons by random things, and I think that's the one thing we need to take note of. A healthy Carlos Carrasco is definitively in the same equation as Corey Kluber. I would make the case that a healthy full season of Carlos Carrasco would give us perhaps the best season from a starter in Indians baseball over the past 15 years, which is a big statement, especially considering Kluber's Cy Young season. If healthy, let's start with Carlos Carrasco and throw Corey Kluber into this. What do you think you're going to get from these two guys in a healthy season? We've talked about Kluber, and we've gotten shellacked a little bit because, heaven forbid, we said his skills aren't going to be as good as they were in the Cy Young. He comes out last year and has a great season. I think everybody can say, as good as it wasn't the Cy Young season. So, Mike, your thoughts on the top two, and then get us started on Danny Salazar.
Yeah, that's the thing with Kluber. We've seen. I don't even know how to have this conversation. We've seen Corey Kluber's best season, but that doesn't mean he's not going to have a really good Cy Young contention season. But interesting to me is I kind of think this is the season where Carlos Carrasco makes the leap in front of Corey Kluber, just in terms of their career arc. If Carrasco can stay out there, I really like his profile, and I think, as Kluber loses a tick or so maybe over this season and sort of, deals with the weight of pitching 260 innings, including the playoffs, sort of think this is the year Carrasco might surpass him, and, they're 1A and 1B, or at least Carrasco begins to match him. Salazar is he's the puzzle piece, and he like always has been. He has that top end velocity, and he has a splitter that's probably the best splitter in baseball. Split change, however you want to call it. It's an elite pitch. But the command was sort of messy last year, and whether that was based on arm health or something else, I think that's something we really have to sort of factor into how optimistic we are.
But as we look at the big three and we worry about Corey Kluber's innings last year, especially when you take into account the playoff and the stress, and while they were able to use him in several scenarios in which they were able to get him out of the game in the sixth inning or so because of that fantastic bullpen, we do have to look at this season with that fantastic bullpen top to bottom. We have 6 positions locked up, and we'll talk about them in our next pod. But that's point A with regards to these three, especially when you consider Salazar and health. Also, when you take into account that 10-day DL, which is going to keep popping up in this equation, is it possible? And you never know. I think as avant-garde as the Indians front office is, they are definitively on the other end of the spectrum with a guy like Terry Francona, who's more of an old school mentality. And while he did use the bullpen in a unique way, and you can give him credit for that, we keep mentioning this 10-day DL, thinking this organization is going to use it the right way. And by that, I mean where we saw a guy like Danny Salazar get put on the DL twice last year, or not on the DL, or just gotten rest. We could see him get put on the DL 2 or 3 or 4 times this year when he tweaks something, or at least has it in his head that he tweaks something, and have a guy like Ryan Merritt come up and do one of those 4-inning starts where we get to see a little bit of the bullpen, dependent on what they do. Is this, when you look at the big three and you look at health and you look at how we start looking at the Cy Young, especially with a new 10-day DL, are we in a new era of baseball where 260 innings aren't going to be concerning in a previous year because A, probably not going to happen anymore with a 10-day DL. You could give a guy a little bit more rest. B, rotations may start looking like a 6 or 7 man rotation, especially when you take in off days into consideration in 10-day DLs. And, a guy like Salazar, is he going to be expected to make, 33 or 34 starts? Or if he does make said starts, are we only going to be looking at him as a 5-inning guy? I mean, are we just looking at a new era where when your bullpen is as good as the Indians' bullpen is, and you have a chance at the World Series, where you're literally going to see the bullpen almost match the rotation, maybe not in innings, but at least swallow up a big percentage of their innings as opposed to previous years?
Yeah, and one of the decisions they have to make too is, I think, how much of Andrew Miller they want to save for October, right? Like, I think he's someone who is eating a large chunk out of the innings in October, but also part of it was, we sort of like, he wasn't overused in the regular season. And obviously, I guess they have Shaw who can sort of eat up innings in 6-7, and Otero and McAllister, which, I know people complain about these guys, but they're like super competent for your 6th inning guys. Like, they're really over the bar for 6th inning guy. Dan Otero is an elite 6th inning guy, in my opinion, who can go 1 to 2 innings. I think that's a really great point with Salazar. I think this is a spot where the Indians can kind of try and protect him, throw him 150 innings, manipulate Merritt around 40 or 50 innings, Clevenger around, though I'm certainly less optimistic about Mike Clevenger than I think most people are. I think that's the way to go, and I think that would be really creative. What's the optimum amount of starts that you see for Danny Salazar?
Well, so, being the Danny Salazar guy that I am, I want him to be a workhorse. I want him to be in that 200 innings pitched realm. That said, as much as I hate to admit this, he's never been that guy. He's always had issues. He's always had tweaks. He's always had major injuries. And of course, when you look at a guy who's at Tommy John, and you look at the percentage of said pitchers putting that much torque on their arm, revisiting said injury, I just don't know that the Indians will even want to play around with that. Now he seems to be healthy. So I guess if we're looking at innings, I would say that the 160 inning mark would be if he gets there and is healthy and they use everything at their disposal, like I think they will, I'll be ecstatic. Anything above that to me is icing on the cake. But until we get that back-to-back, 160 plus inning season, and I know 160 doesn't sound like a lot, but for Salazar it is. I think we'll be fine. So I don't want to overdo it. I mean, I think with any rotation, I think when you look at any pitcher in the top three, you're looking at 200 innings. You want them to get to that 190, 200. And of course, a guy like Kluber has always been a guy who can get you more. Even a guy like Bauer is a guy, with that rubber arm who could get you a ton of innings. But Mike, I would say you're 150, my 160. I would say if you're within 20 games of that, well, I don't want to say under it because that would be a lot less than we'd want. But I would say floor 150, ceiling 180. Anything above that, really, you're getting one hell of a season from Danny Salazar. I think in that wheelhouse, you're getting a good season from Danny Salazar, anyways, just because of how good he is. My bounce back to you is this the year where Danny Salazar kind of fully realizes his, 3-pitch potential, where he's utilizing the fastball as we've seen him do in the past, but we throw in, with the off-speed offerings, we're throwing in that curveball that we keep seeing, so every so often in a tantalizing fashion. Can Salazar take it to the next level, or does that put the kind of torque on his arm? And, the counter to that is, or the Indians not letting him throw a lot of those pitches because of what it does to elbow shoulder. I mean, I don't know. But I would say, would you agree with me that the 150 to 175 is kind of the wheelhouse?
Yeah, I think that's where it's got to be, especially if you want. It's when you're in this situation, it's so strange, right? Like, we have to sort of. The Indians are so much better than any other team in the Central on paper. And really most teams in the American League that, part of your decision making, and I think this will start to happen in June and July if the Indians get off to the solid start, which they should, is, how do we prepare for having the best team ready in the playoffs, which is something that I think Francona has done pretty well. And I'm not going to say anything about that, but, and I think having Salazar for the playoffs as like a 4-inning weapon is awesome. Like, I think what you can do is, like, I would want to just have, the ideal playoff scenario is you have Kluber and Carrasco healthy at the top. For me, then you have Salazar ready to do like 4 or 5 innings. If he pitches great, he goes farther. And you can like bring him in a dynamic, like, you can start with a Merritt and piggyback those two dudes, like a lefty guy throwing slop and a righty guy throwing filth. And then bring in Miller and Allen. I just think that's a really tough, matchup to face. So I think 150 to 175 is great. Like, if he gets, I don't know. Honestly, 175 might even make me a little nervous, but I really hope he gets there. I mean, it's time. Or else, I don't know. And I also just think, like, in the modern era, people's immediate reaction is to like move a guy who's getting you 150 innings to the bullpen because he can't handle the rotation. Like, 150 good innings is super valuable. Like, it's really good.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think, realistically, the Indians have likely 4 guys who are probably locked to get the 150. We'll talk about Bauer here in a second. I think, and you do want to have that workhorse guy, I guess. I mean, and I think in Corey Kluber, you're going to have that. And my one brief little talk about Kluber here is, is again, when I say diminishing skill here, I'm not talking about turning into, some number 8 guy. He's still obviously an ace. What we're talking about here is sometimes you just have an elite season that as you get older, you don't match. But, I think we're seeing a Jake Arrieta who's kind of in that wheelhouse of being really, really, really good, but he's just not going to match that season from a year and a half ago. So what works, I guess, Mike, just real quick on Kluber. I mean, Kluber is a guy who's a lock for probably 200 plus, stays healthy, knows what he's doing when he's on the mound. And even if he loses a tick, this is a guy who's probably got 4, 5, 6 good years in him, dependent on health. Is this what you see from him? Just that consistent 15, 16, 17 game winner. And we're not talking about the Charles Nagy 15, 16, 17 game winner. We're talking about, this low FIP, low XFIP, low ERA guy who consistently just figures out where to throw the ball against guys that, normally hit it.
This was the awesome thing, I think, or at least the revealing thing about the postseason in regards to Kluber, and that there were points at which late in the postseason his velo was down a little bit.
Yeah.
And you could he commands the baseball so well, and he has two really good secondary pitches where, like, you can see how the latter end of his career is still going to be really productive. He has exquisite command, and he has a really good mix of pitches, and also, just throwing it out there to Roberto Perez again, he's a great game caller, and the Indians do a really good job sort of planning and scheming behind the plate. I think Kluber's going to age better than I would have expected, because I think we see, guys with that quality of command and those
Efficient.
offerings,
So
he can lose 2 miles per hour and still make guys look silly at like 93.
Yeah. Well,
it's the reality of his arsenal.
I mean, I think, the efficiency of his pitches and how he throws and his everything about his delivery is just so fantastic to watch. And on top of that, you have a guy who, works really well with, as you said, his catcher, Roberto Perez, Yan Gomes as well. And I know in a later podcast, we're going to get back to the catcher, especially with the WBC going on. But I think, with regards to Kluber, going forward, the control that we have for him, the price that we have him for, and just this guy who's just always there. I mean, it's fantastic to have a guy like that, kind of an elite Charles Nagy, I guess. But that's kind of a rip on Kluber. But, and then if you have a guy like Carrasco, who kind of takes the mantle as that electric guy who's, striking guys out at will and has command of 4 pitches again, just in the mold of Corey Kluber, maybe even slightly better. And I don't know if I even get flack for that, because I think people agree with it. Salazar being the unknown, in that he has that elite level stuff. We just don't know where he's going to go. But then if they handle him right, but then the big question here, and this seems to be the question, this is like 4 straight years of discussing this, the Trevor Bauer, the Trevor Bauer factor, where we have this, in many ways, an elite mind, and in many ways, a 10-cent mind, as some probably teammates would call it. And if Bauer ever matches the potential that you see on occasion, and when you talked about Kluber, what was striking about Kluber is he'll sometimes have a 6, 7, 8, 9 pitch at bat with somebody he's battling against, but you can see every pitch, the command that he's utilizing, where he's trying to throw it in a certain place to get a guy to swing or to get a guy to think one way, and then he goes a completely different way to get the strikeout. Whereas a guy like Trevor Bauer will come in and he'll have a 13 or 14 pitch at bat, where you can tell some of the pitches he throws goes completely. He's either doing one of two things. He's either throwing it somewhere to prove a point, or he doesn't have control of it. And I think that's the big difference. If he can ever figure out the command that that Corey Kluber has, I think Trevor Bauer can take it to the next level. The question is, Mike, does Trevor Bauer ever get to be anything other than a guy who can just have a rubber arm? And I mean, don't get me wrong, he's got elite stuff. I'm not questioning that. But to me, he just seems like a guy who gets logged into these 35 pitch innings where immediately, well, we're going to need somebody in the 5th inning.
I love how, like, every spring training he, like, messes around with you and doesn't walk anybody, doesn't strike out a ton of dudes, and just, like, pitches well. And then in the regular season, he's like, nah, we're going back to that, like, messy Trevor Bauer thing, which is fine. I know a lot of people expect him to break out.
Started throwing everything in his last spring start, got hit around a little bit, and came out and said, yeah, but that was my best day. And he, gave up his first runs. And just
I love that. I love that. He's so much smarter than us. I really appreciate it. Can we discuss, before we talk about the pitcher Trevor Bauer, can we discuss how strange and foolish one must be to make public or attempt to make public a lot of your team's political opinions?
You phrase that very
how freaking foolish that is, and how much you would be reviled in that locker room. Like, there is no way that is not a huge deal. And especially with the number of Latin players in that locker room. I think Dan Otero's wife went after him pretty quickly, like publicly on Twitter, but that is not an individually held opinion, and the level of stupidity it requires is insane.
When you fire up Dan Otero's wife, when that's the level of people being pissed off at you, can you imagine what it must be like? But here's the thing: the counter to that, Mike, is does Trevor Bauer give a shit?
I don't think so.
I don't. And that at the end of the day, I mean, people ask me why I think Trevor Bauer ultimately could be a great and bullpen guy. I don't think he gives a shit about really what anyone thinks, which is a bad thing. And I think in some baseball scenarios could be a good thing. But I digress. I don't. Your own political opinion is one thing, but I guess when you open up the window to everybody, that's a whole new. That's gravitas, my friend. That's really taking it to a new level.
That's something. That's something. But yeah, I guess we should talk about Bauer the pitcher. I mean, his stuff is really good. The curveball is amazing. It's a great pitch. I mean, he's getting a lot more ground balls, and I think he made that transition sort of secretly, and it's really important. I think part of that is like an avenue to him being a more efficient and better long-term pitcher the more ground balls he gets, and he really made that transition last year. So in that way, I'm optimistic that he'll be closer to the above-average starter we thought he could be, just because he's made the transition from, hey, I'm going to throw and try and induce a bunch of fly balls, to he sort of has transitioned away from a lot of the effective velocity stuff that sort of made him famous as this sort of creative mechanical mind. So in that way, I think Bauer's really interesting, and I just don't. I mean, literally, the question will always be: can he command the sinker, his two-seamer, which he throws now a lot more than he throws his four-seamer, or at least more than he used to throw his two-seamer? And the question is always like, will his command ever improve enough in that regard to lower the walk rate and allow him to really thrive? And I'm never going to have an answer to that. I hope Trevor answers it, and I hope he really does improve, but that's the thing. That's the wall. Well, that's the wall he has to climb.
He has these games where you see him going in and out on guys. You see him, climbing the ladder in a way that you get these efficient, amazing, innings where you look and think, man, if he does this for 3 months, he's going to be an all-star in the conversation for Cy Young. But I don't know, like what, I mean, I guess this is kind of a rhetorical question because I think anybody who listens to this podcast is going to be able to answer that, but it almost seems like he gets bogged down. And the question is what bogs him down? But I think his mind bogs him down. I mean, he just goes off in so many different directions throughout a season that it's impossible to think that it doesn't affect him on the mound. And I don't know, there are days it seems like he's pitching against I mean, I can't imagine when he pitches against Toronto that he's not thinking about Twitter later. I don't know. He's just such an enigmatic guy, but I do want to move away from it because it could get toxic if we keep going down that path. I do want to talk about the potpourri of guys, starting with Josh Tomlin. You've already mentioned Merritt, Clevenger, Plutko is a guy that we need to talk about as well, who are guys that we're probably going to get to see, and Moramondo as well, who I think is likely a bullpen guy down the stretch. But my question to you, Mike, is, as much as we have depth, and we could go into innings counts like we did last year, but I think it's hard to do, again, mentioning the 10-day DL and this elite bullpen that we have. When you look at the depth that we have, I mean, this is supplemental depth. This isn't we're going to eventually be the guy depth. And I guess that's when I started this podcast off by being tentative about a rotation, that's my big concern. If you lose any of the big three, you've got this supplemental depth that can come in almost like a backup quarterback and be the backup quarterback for a few starts. What do you think about these guys? Who's the one guy that stands out to you? You mentioned being nervous about Clevenger. I think Tomlin is a guy who, we saw who he can be in April of last year for a few starts. We saw who he can be, once he came back healthy after working some bullpen innings, obviously in the playoffs. What do we get? Is he the legit 5 guy, or are we going to see a potpourri of guys, including that Columbus rotation, coming up and down? And is there a guy that we haven't mentioned? I mean, do you see anybody else? Why the hell didn't the Indians make a move? I mean, I guess that's my thing. I mean, I don't think we're going to talk about the minor league system today, Mike, because I guess if I'm going to rant today, if I'm going to do one of my infamous rants, why in the hell did the Indians not bring in a starter? And I know we brought in some guys, but why didn't we go get that lottery ticket? Why didn't we go out and get, I don't know. I mean, there were 3 or 4 guys out there that everybody kind of saw. Why didn't we get the lottery ticket that we could stash away for a little bit until April or May and perhaps have a guy who we could count on as not being a supplemental, who could, if everything worked out, could perhaps be a guy who we see in June or July, be one of the 5 guys. Why didn't we do that? And who do you think of the other guys we have left who could actually be that guy if we have one?
Wouldn't Doug Fister have been fun?
Oh, God.
Just like a nice little Doug Fister stash. I really, I'm not, I know somebody else on site, I really enjoy Michael Bode. We argue a lot about stuff, and I really enjoy his point of view, where he comes from, and we agree a lot of the time, too. He's really high on Clevenger. I get it. I'm really not. I think he's probably the highest upside guy to fill in that position, just because on a pure stuff standpoint, but his command of the baseball is just not good. I think he has command that's really sort of similar to Danny Salazar, except he doesn't have the best split change in baseball, which is sort of like what allows Danny Salazar to be an above average starter. And also Clevenger isn't out there touching 97 when he needs to. He's out there touching 94, 95 when he needs to. So I think there isn't a guy, and I was somewhat optimistic about Anderson, I think, because he throws strikes, he can induce ground balls, the arsenal had improved, and I sort of thought, I think there were enough things there where it was more about adapting to and manipulating the arsenal than the actual arsenal itself. But, I mean, you know these guys, like, I'm sure Adam Plutko is a great person, and he's a great depth arm, but he's just a great depth arm. And Merritt's the same. They're sort of, I think you can get by, like, eating innings with those dudes, 4 and fly, messing with, optimizing your bullpen around them. I think you can do that, but they're not substantive starting pitching depth to me. And you and I obviously don't view Mondo as any sort of starter. And even, I guess he's sort of ticked up in production the last 2 years, which is positive, but I'm still pretty nervous about Sean Mondo.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's, at the end of the day, that's my concern. I think if our rotation begins the year as our 5 guys and ends the year with the same 5 guys being healthy, and as we enter the playoffs, hopefully that obviously we'll be in really good shape. I mean, had that rotation been somewhat in shape as we headed into the playoffs last year, one can only wonder, how that World Series ends. Of course, what ifs are historically talked about here in Cleveland, but I think our depth is interesting, but I don't know that we have that elite depth. And I think that, when you talk about a guy who lacks control like Clevenger, I think, well, there have, what are the signs that he's going to all of a sudden figure that out? It's almost like contact rates on the offensive side of things. Those generally aren't things that you figure out. Although one of our next podcasts, I think you and I are going to have to talk about the realities of Bradley Zimmer's new swing, if it is such a thing, and, talk about longevity there, because certainly, things can change if you do the right things to do it. It's just, at Clevenger's age, I mean, he's a young guy, but at the same time, you're 26 years old. How often does that control change? All right, Mike. So as we wrap this podcast up with regards to the rotation, there have been comments about it being the best in baseball. I think that's people having a lot of brevity are saying that, especially when you consider, really the only 2 lock healthy guys are probably Carrasco. Well, I mean, throw Bauer in there as well, but, healthy elite guys, you've got 2 in Carrasco and Kluber. And, is this with Salazar, Bauer, Tomlin in this four-man kind of thing in Columbus, with the guys that we mentioned, with Plutko, with Merritt, and Mondo. and maybe we see Anderson, who knows, getting shut down in spring with the UCL is a big deal, but is this the elite rotation? I mean, obviously it could be, but I mean, do they handle it the right way? I mean, do we have the best rotation in baseball, or do we have the best rotation in the American League?
I think we're in the 5 to 10 range, and I guess I'm sounding like really pessimistic in this podcast, and I don't want to. Like, I think it's a really strong rotation. I think the top end is really good, but I've suddenly become a lot more concerned about the depth of the rotation, and there's just risk. I just think, and I think your point about Carrasco is really strong in that the injuries to Carrasco are just a collection of like unique, strange, and likely unrepeated issues. So I think that's a really positive thing when you look at the season. I cannot wait for him to leap forward. Carrasco, who throws like 200 innings, is a Carrasco who's like in the top 3 in a Cy Young Award vote, and I definitely think he has that in him. I just want to see it happen. So,
gosh.
So
I'm honestly getting chills just you saying that, because sharing a burden with 2 elite guys at the top end for a full season. Oh my gosh. I'm a big believer in rotational dominoes, Mike. And I think Kluber and Carrasco and the effect that they could have on the rest of this rotation, even a guy like Clevenger. Oh my gosh, especially with a guy like Callaway, who we haven't mentioned until just now. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but the goosebumps. It is, if you look on paper, it probably is the third best part of this team, which is kind of interesting to say. But man, oh man, oh man, you could see a situation where Kluber and Carrasco and Callaway could do some damage if one other guy steps up and matches them, especially in a playoff series. I'm sorry. Back to you.
So this is what I think. And this is what I think about the rotation. I think the rotation is the thing that's going to determine whether they win 88 games or 100 games. Like, if this rotation, if they get one of those years where everybody stays healthy, and where the team really sort of, Salazar, Carrasco, Kluber, you get 90th percentile performances. Bauer, you get a 90th percentile performance. I absolutely think they're one of the, easy one of the 3 best rotations if you get those. Then you're looking at a team that is going to win 100 games. I just think that that's like not that probable, and they're probably going to win like 92 games. And I think the rotation is going to be above average, but I think the rotation has the most volatility for the Indians and has the sort of upside that can push them to this sort of dominant team, or can leave them as just a really, really good team, which both of those things are great. I mean, they're stacked. This team's loaded. Which is really fun as someone who analyzes this team, because I don't have to talk about Jason Donald anymore. But
so true.
But I think that's where the upside on this team rests. I think I'm pretty confident in the stability of the bullpen. I know I never would ever say that traditionally, but Andrew Miller is just a different talent. He just changes your pen, and this is a well-constructed pen. And I think the lineup's a lot better too, especially if you think there's like a 30% chance that Michael Brantley plays 100 games this year, which totally changes the equation. So I think a lot of the variance is going to sort of rest in the rotation.
Yeah, well, and I think at the end of the day, I think that while we can, I do think the Indians are going to be at the forefront of handling the rotation in the bullpen in a different manner. I mean, you can see it in the playoffs, and while again that's a different scenario than the regular season, I do think that the one thing that Terry Francona loves to do is mess around with pitchers. And I mean that in a positive way, mostly a positive way. I wonder, Mike, and just kind of offhandedly, are we heading to an era where the term starting rotation and bullpen starts to blur together, where we maybe 15 or 20 years from now are dealing with 3-inning guys, 4-inning guys, 2-inning guys, and 1-inning guys, where starters are just happen to be the guy who are at the beginning of the game?
Yeah, and how weird is baseball going to be? I'm not going to lie, like I think it's sort of clear where we think baseball is going, and I sort of hate it, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's great. Like, I love that Terry Francona did the really obvious thing and like used the hell out of Andrew Miller in a really optimal usage. But also it sucks. Like, I love the starting pitcher, and I don't want to see rosters with 30 men instead of 25 men. So you have 5 more of these like pivot reliever starter guys who throw 3 innings, and that doesn't interest me. Those games are going to be longer. You're going to have tons of pitching changes. The strategy is going to be actually almost too complex, even as someone who like loves the complexity of baseball. I don't want it to go there, and I think it's sort of gonna, and that sucks.
Well, but imagine. Well, it is turning into a specialized game, and it was kind of striking. I think we're both in love with the idea of these multi-dimensional players, guys like J Ram, who can play multiple positions, and you have a guy like Andrew Miller, who started off as a starter and is a bullpen guy, but we could see could go 50 innings in a game, 50 innings in a game, 50 pitches in a game. And it's made me think, like, if they do eventually up their roster, and that does seem to be the direction they're going, and trust me, after this 10-day DL implodes upon the rule makers of Major League Baseball, I think that you'll see a 26th or even a 27th guy. I worry about having that front end guy be piggybacking becoming the thing, where piggybacking turns into. Can you imagine a 10-day DL and a 27-man roster? With exemption spots, perhaps for double headers? I mean, it could turn into a fiasco. And in one way, kind of a neat one. In another way, gone are the days of 250 inning guys who throw that many strikeouts. And I think that would be something that baseball would miss. But imagine this, Mike. Imagine if in that era of baseball, you're the guy who can still pitch 9 innings. Imagine the amounts of money they will throw your way to save that kind of roster spot. It would be amazing. There'd be a $500 million man in baseball. All right, we're going to close up shop there, Mike. Obviously, we like to close with plugs. I'm gonna throw one out first, because I'm gonna make you have to think. I'm gonna throw out your piece today. You just posted it, a Saturday piece, because I don't know when this is going to go up. Looking at the Browns moves at the beginning of the free agency period, including the Brock Osweiler trade, and how different perspectives are coming at that trade in many different ways. And it's interesting to me how you can't just look at that deal and go, wow, they were thinking outside the box. That's cool. But I digress. Make sure you read Mike's piece. I mean, he doesn't venture away from the Indians a lot, but I suspect that's going to be happening more and more as this Brown season kind of comes into fold. So that's my plug. Sorry, I took yours. Ha, ha, ha. What's your plug?
Oh my goodness!
I've got one for you. If you don't, if I could.
From my understanding, a very infamous Cleveland sports column called "The Corner of Carnegie in Ontario."
Oh, you're an a-hole.
is going to be returning on Monday, March 13th, probably near when this podcast goes up. And one would be foolish if one did not read Jim Pete's returning
State
column.
of the Union, State of the Union, State of the Union, State of the Union. It's my favorite piece to write every year. All right, one more, and this is coming from both Mike and I. And I'm only throwing this out there because the amounts of work that this young man puts into it.
Jeff? A little El Jefe love here?
Screw Jeff. This has nothing to do with Jeff. I am not okay with Jeff Nomina putting his family in front of us having a beer. I'm not okay with it. I'm done. Jeff Nomina, when you listen to this, you need to understand something. You need to put us in front of your family. That doesn't even sound, I can't even say that. That's so wrong. No, it's not. Jeff Nomina, next week. You, me, Hattery, beer. And I'm not pushing any of your work until then, except I already did today. So I digress. No, another friend of ours who I don't know if he ever stops typing from his keyboard. He writes for Bang the Book, and he has put I've literally all morning been sitting through Adam Burke's primers on every team in Major League Baseball. If you haven't read them, you need to find @Skating Tripods on Twitter. Find his or find Mike or I, because we've both been retweeting these. Adam Burke has done primer on every single team in baseball, and we're not talking a small little bit of work. We're talking a very, very intense level of over/under looks at the win totals of each team in Major League Baseball. You would be you would be,
for context. He has written 94,000 words in these previews, which is about the length of a Harry Potter book. So they're pretty detailed and they have some
Yeah.
good
Well,
stuff.
well, yeah. I mean, and for me to say that, when my average piece is about 3,500 words, but I do that once a week. This guy did this in a week. So I just want to, you need to read it if you want to get a good jump start onto your season, including the Indians, which I'm looking at right now. Make sure you check out Adam Burke's work. Check him out at Skating Tripods, and of course he writes at Bang the Book and probably writes more words than anybody else. And while it's not Cleveland centric, if you are up, but up next, yes, the bullpen. I can't believe I'm actually looking forward to it. Don't we still hate the bullpen?
Yeah, we do, but not this bullpen.
All right, I'm wrapping it up there. 45 minutes. Life is good. All right, my computer has even locked me out, so I'm
Classic.
stopping now. All right,
Classic.
on to the next.